everyone, my name is Sam and thanks for checking out my video. Make sure to give it a thumbs up and hit the subscription button down below. So I got tagged by, I believe it's Sean the Maniac, to do a just book tag, pick 10 books from your shelf, whether you've read them or not, and talk about them. So I got stuck at like 8 for like several minutes and I was like, oh my god, I forgot like this entire part of my house, and then had a hard time whittling it down. But I got it down to 10. And I think these are all books that I have read actually, so I'm pretty happy about that. So the first of the 10 books that I wanted to just kind of talk about is Night by Eli Wiesel. We unfortunately lost Eli, I think it was about a year ago. He thankfully got to live an awful long life. I originally had to read this book in French for, I believe it was grade 10 or 11 French class. I did French extended school for high school and most of elementary, so this was just one of the pieces that we had to read. This book has been translated into, I believe it's like 47 was the last time I saw the number, different languages. And it's technically fiction, but it is Eli's story of his living during World War II as a Jewish man and being the victim in a horrible nightmare of a time period. And it's not long, but this is the first book that I can remember in a long time that broke me, and I just sat there, and it's not a book that I don't even think now. I mean, I read it pretty, like, almost on an annual basis, it seems like, and it's not something I think that I've still ever processed, that, like, we did this as people. Like, it's just a book that it's not long. It's actually quite short. There's 2 books to it. It's a whole trilogy instead as well. It's just an important book, and I honestly don't remember. I think this is the first book that I remember reading and it hurting me and sticking with me and taking a lot of things away from it. And I can just kind of continue to follow this author out of pure curiosity after reading this story. Like I said, it's technically fiction, but it is, in reality, it's basically a nonfiction survival story of the Holocaust. You're going to see a couple more historical fictions on here because I'm obsessed with World War II and historical fictions, and I don't apologize. The second book on my list here is The Book Thief by Markus Zusak. I actually own 3 copies of this book because I love it so much. I have this anniversary edition, I have the movie cover, and then I have the original one with like the dominoes falling on it. I'm looking for the UK one that has like Death dancing with the little girl, but I haven't been able to find it in Canada yet or off Book Depository, so yeah. If you haven't read this book, you have not lived, okay? This book is told from the perspective of Death and this girl Liesel, and it's just a fascinating look, and I think it's not one that we really get in a lot of World War II stories. Absolutely, like, survival stories are incredibly important, and that is the only way I hope we will as a society learn, and that is a way to remember and fight back against what was trying to be done to these communities. This was also very interesting, and it was something that was kind of enforced in me when I was in university studying. It was, not all Nazis were German and not all Germans were Nazis. And we tend to forget about that aspect of the inner rebels that were fighting within Germany and the occupied territories. And this was a particularly interesting story of Liesel growing up, and her parents were socialists at the time, and her parents were basically forced almost to have to give their children to a family for adoption, and the son dies along the way. So it's Liesel's life, and she gets adopted by this family that on the outside look like something, and then as you go through this, they harbor, a Jewish person trying to save them. They actively go out of their way, despite what it's going to cost them, to try and protect these people while also trying to stay out of, a concentration camp themselves. The ending of this book, I actually originally, the first time, it was recommended to me by my brother when I was in like elementary school, and I picked it up from the library at the time and read, I think it was the start of the second to last chapter where, what happened is revealed, and I threw the book across the room and cried, and then frantically ran and picked it up because I was like, oh my god, that's a library book, what if I broke it? Thankfully I didn't, but this is a book that, again, I just keep coming back to this book, and it's at different times of the year and just different moods. I always just feel like I have to read this. It both gives and takes away my faith in humanity, and it's almost like a reset for me, just reading-wise. And I actually haven't even been able to make myself read the other books that Marcus Zusak has written, because I have this phobia of, if it's, I know it can't possibly be as good as The Book Thief, but then I'm just like, if that ruins this book for me, I will be heartbroken. This is my favorite standalone of all time, and I adore this book and everything that the author put into it, and there isn't a single thing in it I would change, and it's such an important book, and it has to be a classic of, not even just my generation, but like everyone going forward. It's going to be one that I think you should have to read in school and all that kind of stuff. So I would very, very highly recommend this book. And continuing on this train of like World War II and depression, Sarah's Key by Tatiana de Rosna. This book, I originally got just like a regular paperback copy, and it got damaged a couple times when I was moving. So when I finally settled down, I bought the anniversary edition, which is this one here. And I actually this is kind of like The Book Thief. I unfortunately, I made the unfortunate decision to read this right after reading The Book Thief. And if you've ever read either of those books, you know why that is not a good idea to do to your emotions. And this was, again, just a totally different perspective that we don't get a whole lot. And I think it's slowly coming out a little bit more of, what they did in France while being occupied. Because if you've ever seen the trailer, actually, for the movie that they did, the adaptation of this, it perfectly kind of summarizes it. One of the journalists is saying, like, well, there's got to be documents for it. The Germans kept meticulous documents. And the main character explains, the Germans didn't do this, we did it. And that's just something that, it was just something fresh that I had never read before, again, when I was at this age. And the writing is beautiful. It's got the alternative timelines of present-day journalists going back and reading of what happens when this family is taken, and they are Jewish people in France. And it just stung, and you knew what was going to happen, but you just kept hoping and praying that this was going to be a happy ending, right? This is going to be a happy ending. No. And it's perfect the way it is. And this is, again, too, I don't know if I want to read another work by this author, because it can't possibly be as good as this book. It's just not possible. So I just hope that it can't ruin it for me. I haven't even been able to make myself watch the film adaptation. Every time I sit down to it, I watch like the first 20 seconds of it and just like, no, I can't do this to myself right now. It's a heartbreaking story that, once again, if you have any interest in World War II, and honestly, even if not, you need to read things like this to get a full understanding of, it wasn't just one single person at fault for some things that happened. There were a lot of people that supported it and went along with things, unfortunately, and this is the result of people doing those sorts of things. And on a slightly happier note, the next book I want to mention is Shadow and Bone by Leigh Bardugo. This book is actually compared to like Sarah's Key and The Book Thief, it's a relatively new release by Leigh Bardugo. This book, I was living in Canmore when working in Banff. I think it was 2 or 3 summers ago. With undergrad and grad school, I really wasn't able to afford or have the time to do leisure reading. Books were expensive, and it took me, more time in the day than there is to read all the stuff that I had to read for like one history course. So the summer that I got to live in Canmore was like the first time that I got to evaluate, you're going to be a professional librarian in a year and you haven't really read a book for leisure in like a long time. So I went to the bookstore and just asked for someone's general recommendation, and they sent me to this book and another book on this list. And I am so thankful for that staff member who did that. I'm someone who likes historical fiction, but I've read so many horrifying things with school that I don't always want to read those books that leave a hole in your heart and make you lose faith in humanity. But I want that historical feel, and I missed that Russian influence that I got in undergrad. So they recommended this to me, and I'm so happy. I think it was actually her first book by Leigh Bardugo, and there's like a sun summoner and magic, and it's got this heavy Russian influence and these characters, and I'm like a minority in the population that I don't absolutely hate Mao. So this book series is just, it just has this like, whenever I think about it, it just makes me think of rejoining the leisure reading world of that happiness. When I read this book, I was like, I need the sequel right away, and had to run to the bookstore before they closed. I hadn't done that in such an incredibly long time, and that is always a memory that I'm going to attach to this book series. hand in hand with Shadow and Bone is Cinder by Marissa Meyer. Once again, this is a debut work by the author, and I went to the bookstore and the same employee who recommended Shadow and Bone to me recommended Cinder, and this was like my reintroduction to the retellings world. I knew that they were being published, I just hadn't sat down to read them, and I honestly don't know if I would have picked this book up without the recommendation of that store, because it's got like the cybery thing. This looks more sci-fi retelling to me than kind of fantasy, which it's got a sci-fi element, but that's definitely not its only thing. So I am so tremendously grateful to that store employee, and this book was like this and Scarlet was like my favorite of the series, but I actually really enjoyed that series. And once again, this is a series I will perpetually attach the emotion of being reintroduced to a love of leisure reading, because university really stripped that away from me, and things like this, it's just fun, light reading, and you cheer for the good, and you throw tomatoes at the bad. One book that I honestly just constantly ramble about and just push a lot is The Black Witch by Laurie Forrest. It's got some controversy around it, and I mean, I stand on the opposite side of the controversy, but this is just a book that this and like The Hate You Give and Dear Martin are books that just like honestly have given me a lot of faith back in the world in the last like year or so, of YA books acknowledging the problems in the world and giving us literature, fiction as well, because it is quite popular, of dealing with prejudice and all of the problems in the world. And if it takes a fantasy book for people to do that, then I am so for this trend, and I'm so happy that we are getting this sort of content in YA that is truly going to impact the world and how my generation and the one below me deal with the problems that we're currently dealing with in the world. One of my like all-time most memorable books for sure is Coraline by Neil Gaiman. I think I've told this story before on my channel, but I remember going to the library and returning books and then asking the librarian, what do you have, what else can I read? I've read all of Dear Canada, and I don't like the Babysitter's Club. And then they just kept pushing me up, look at the pink stand over there, there's the Babysitter's Club on it. And I went, no, I don't want the Babysitter's Club. I tried it, I don't like it, I find it boring. I want something else. I've read all Dear Canada, what else do you have for me? And they just kept pushing and pushing. So to spite that librarian, I went and found the book that looked the least appropriate for me. And I'm not a fan of horror. I just happened to pick up Coraline. It's the book, I remember vividly the cover being black and then having like a puppet doll and then the button eyes. So I have the more up-to-date version now. And that was my first introduction to Neil Gaiman. And that's the first book I remember, like, my parents being like, okay, it's time to go to bed. And then me being like, no, you go to bed. I'm finishing this book. Excuse you. And leave me alone. And I don't even know why. It's just so vividly in my mind. And I've watched the movie and everything. I'm obsessed with this book in particular. And I don't even remember the full story anymore. I have to reread it, I think, soon. It's just this book that will forever be in my mind of me enjoying reading when I was younger and trying to like rebel against what people of superior like position and power wanted me to do. The next book is also a Neil Gaiman book, Stardust. I remember I hadn't even heard of this book. I saw the movie randomly. I don't even remember how. I thought the movie was freaking hilarious, and I absolutely love Claire Danes too. And then there's like a dancing, singing pirate, and like absolutely loved that movie. So then I finally found the book and picked it up and read it, and I was like, oh, this is why I loved the movie. And then I rewatched the movie. But it was actually like a movie that I don't even remember why, but it stuck so with me. It's not like it's an incredibly morally important book or anything like that. Or movie, or story. It just, for whatever reason, that movie is like a favorite of mine. I don't know why. It was one of the many reasons I got my tattoo. I have a tattoo that says Stardust. And, there's a couple reasons behind it, which is kind of a long-winded story. But one of them was, Stardust was a word that came up, in one place and another place and then another place. And then I remember being like, the movie too, the movie Stardust is awesome. And then the book, I love the book too. So it just made like everything just like stars aligned situation. And that was one of the reasons why I got the tattoo that I did. So that's just something I'm always going to associate with this book. And, it was like my first like grown-up adult permanent life decision, and that's what I'm going to associate this book and movie with. The second to last book that I wanted to just mention was Illuminae by Amy Kaufman and Jay Kristoff. This book is, I think, the first time that I've read something outside of just like traditional norm format of just, regular fictional novel writing. This story is told through government redacted documents and instant message chats, and it also changed my opinion very much on books with more than one author. I used to have this, I think it was just like 1 or 2 books that I read with 2 authors that I just didn't understand. The writing was very choppy and it just didn't work properly. And that was just all I remembered of books with more than one author. That I would have just like total curiosity because of the book cover. Didn't even read the summary, just out of recommendations that I got from friends. I was like, you know what? Whatever. I'll give it a go. I got a copy for Christmas. And I will absolutely never ever regret that. I also bought the audiobooks and everything. And this series, I think it was the first book. I read it this past year, like very late last December. I think this was the first book that I remember being like, finishing it and just dropping the book and being like, I need a break. I need the sequel now. And I don't remember a book before this one giving me such intense hangover. And the sequel is the same way. It tore my heart out, and then I was frantic for the 3rd book, and then was disappointed to find out that the 3rd book hadn't been out yet. It's still not out. It's coming out in March, but that's just too far away for me. I think the pinpoint memory that I've attached to it as well that has kind of just kept this book as a favorite of mine is I got it around the Christmas time, my first really adult Christmas, where, you know, I had my own place, I had my own job, I had the ability to buy myself something for Christmas, and I was happy and content with my life, I think, for the first time in a very, very long time. And that's something I associate with this and finding a new community of people to hang around with, book-wise, with, you know, Facebook groups and all that stuff. So this book's just, it's got a place in my heart. And the last of the books that I wanted to mention here is Harry Potter and the Philosopher's Stone. Yeah, we say philosophers in Canada. I guess the Americans say sorcerers. Just to be like totally like clear on this, I own 10 copies of Harry Potter and the Philosopher's Stone. I'm not kidding. I own the illustrated copy. I have a box set of the, I think it's the adult YA box set from the UK. It's got like sketch drawings on each of the front of them. They're really, really cool. And then I bought one of every single house cover, hardcover and paperback. Not kidding. Not even remotely kidding. I have zero shame about it. I'm happy I bought them. Harry Potter for my generation, I think it's totally just a generational thing that I've attached to it as well. That is like something that, and I've had it multiple times, when I'm just in like a totally random place, you don't know a single human being, if you're wearing Harry Potter memorabilia, people will they'll come up and ask you what Harry Potter house you are in. Everyone knows what it is. It's just a staple of our society, and like, it just makes me happy to see how easily like total strangers can communicate over something like that. And it just had such a big impact. I remember as a kid, like people waiting outside bookstores when the book was coming out and seeing how famous a female author could be when writing something, you know, magic. And it's, I don't think it was like the first book that I ever fell in love with, though I did definitely fall in love with it. It's just a part of, it's always been a part of my life. And same with the movies and it's just everywhere, and I don't think it's ever going to go away now, especially with Fantastic Beasts following it up. I just remember very vividly the story I have attached to it. In grade 4, we had a teacher that we would go 1 chapter a day, we would read Harry Potter, and that was like kind of a treat that she incorporated into our class schedule. And she'd put the little cassette tape, I remember the cassette tape, into the boombox that we had in the room and plug it in, and it was the voice of Hagrid, and we would listen. We'd all follow along. And it was just like it's just a community generational thing that no matter where you go, like not even just in Canada, but anywhere in Canada you go, people will, you know, they'll see you wearing Hogwarts memorabilia. They see my Hogwarts wallet and, you know, who's your favorite Harry Potter character? You love Luna Lovegood? Oh my god, I love her too. It's kind of like a Doctor Who thing. It's just, I don't know, it's just wonderful to see that kind of stuff, especially from a book, because people have the things of like, oh, books are dying, we don't read anymore, and then you see the impact something like Harry Potter can have, and it just warms my heart. So those are all of the books that I wanted to talk about. I don't know anyone really in the community, so I don't really have anyone to tag. I mean, tag yourself and let me know if you did it for my video, and I'll come watch yours as well. Make sure to check the description box down below. I have linked all of my social media. If you follow me, I will follow you back.